Greetings and salutations. Today we'll be covering the Wednesday Strangler. The enigmatic tale of the Wednesday Strangler casts a chilling shadow over the Saga prefecture in Japan. These slayings span from 1975 to 1989. This suspected serial slayer was known for the haunting moniker earned from the eerie vanishing of 7 victims on Wednesdays and their deaths. This has left a legacy of dread in its wake. The 7 unfortunate victims who fell to this serial slayer include someone as young as 12 years old. Their lives had been abruptly extinguished and their fates forever shrouded in shadows. Despite the passing of several years, the sinister identity of the Wednesday Strangler remains concealed, a vexing puzzle for investigators and a source of disquiet for all those who dare delve into the saga of the Saga woman murders. It must be noted that only 6 of the 7 victims disappeared on Wednesdays, and while 5 of the deaths were definitively due to strangulation, the remaining 2 were skeletonized, meaning that the cause of death could not be ascertained. Starting on Wednesday, August 27th, 1975, a cloud of mystery descended upon the quiet neighborhood. On this dreadful Wednesday, a 12-year-old girl by the name of Yamasaki Tomiko vanished from Kitagata without a trace. She had been noted to typically be engrossed in her studies, playing with her friends, or occasionally joining her mother at work. When her mother had returned home that evening, at around midnight, she was met with an eerie silence, left only with the glow of an unattended television and the girl's footwear ominously left at the premises. The mother would worriedly search the neighborhood for her daughter. Being a rather timid child meant that it would be unusual for her to be out that late. Unfortunately, she would be unable to find her, leading to a missing persons report being filed to the police the following day. This would be the start of a chilling enigma. As eyewitnesses emerged, a neighbor's daughter would state that she had spent some time with Yamazaki up until 7 before deciding to return home. The next of the Strangler's slayings would occur a whole 5 years later, on April 12th, 1980. This would be a Saturday in the town of Shirahoshi. The victim was 19-year-old Yakutaki Ritsuko. It must be noted, after she had graduated from her high school, she had moved to Yamagasaki in order to study nursing, and that she had only returned around March 1977, which would lead her to eventually working at the Cafe Linden. And around the time of her disappearance, rumors were abound of her having issues with a member of the opposite sex. Even though there is scant information about this, it must be noted that due to her relations with men, she had attempted to self-terminate before, going so far as to announce that she had intentions to end things by the time of her 20th birthday. A notebook would eventually be found at her place of employment with the statement, "When I think it's only about that person." This supposedly was in reference to her sister's boyfriend. There are some claims that he was seeing both of them, but these claims are hard to verify. On April 12, 1980, Ritsuko was home alone due to her parents being at the hospital. Her dad had been hospitalized some days prior, and her mother had chosen to stay with him. Her siblings were also not home due to her sisters spending the night elsewhere and her brother being hard at work. Ritsuko's whereabouts can be accounted for up until 11:30 when she left work. However, much like the previous victim, her shoes were found at the entrance of her house, meaning that at least she had made it home safely. Her futon had been laid out and her sleeping clothing was missing, and much like in the previous crime scene, no fingerprint evidence which could tie to a perpetrator was discovered. Investigators had very little to follow up on. However, unlike Tomiko's case, investigators did have something more substantial to go on. Her stated desires of self-termination was one of the avenues upon which investigators focused upon. Things would get even more curious as Ritsuko's family would receive a letter. Unfortunately, the first line of this letter has not been made public. The reason for this being that it touches on something private that significantly harms the family. However, the preceding 2 lines were made public. They were, "Your daughter isn't coming back. Suffer." A particularity of this letter was that it was written in a more archaic fashion than what was the norm. The style in which it was written had been out of favor for more than 40 years. At around the same time, the family had received phone calls telling them not to appear on missing persons programs, along with stating that the family should not show Ritsuko's photographs to the media. An estimated 2 months after Ritsuko's disappearance, things would take a rather dark turn. At around 4 p.m. on June 24th, 1980, sanitation workers cleaning the septic tank of Suko Elementary would open a manhole and would make a rather shocking discovery. Inside, amongst the filth, was the unclothed body of Ritsuko Hyakutake. However, due to the state of decomposition, her identity was not known up until her fingerprints were taken. Coroners would note that she had no external wounds, but that she showed signs of bruising around her neck, which would point to her having been strangled. Experts were able to ascertain that she had been slain around the time that she had originally disappeared. Investigators would go on to further interview the sanitation workers, who would state that the tank had also been emptied out on the 21st of April, meaning that the body could not have been there for at least 9 days after Ritsuko's disappearance. Later, investigators would find clumps of dried red hair around one of the bathrooms. Said hair did indeed belong to Ritsuko. With the information gathered, investigators were able to ascertain that the body was moved from a different location to its final resting place between April 21st and June 10th. As authorities were investigating the school and the surrounding areas, on the 27th of June, one of the teachers revealed some rather interesting information. On the 18th of June, to prepare for the opening of the pool, staff wanted to drain the septic tank of the poolside toilets. However, workers would go on to tell them that it was difficult to do because it was purportedly filled with stones. And the teachers would go on to request that the police inspect the septic tank just in case. The police would quickly go on to investigate this. Opening the manhole and looking in, they would be shocked by the sight of what they had found. Inside were the skeletonized remains of a young child, whose clothing, or the remnants of it, matched those of young Yamazaki Tomeko. Authorities would quickly contact the child's mother, who at the time was residing in Saga City. She would quickly rush to the scene, and upon seeing the body and the remains of her clothing, she would break down in tears, verifying that it was indeed her daughter. The remains would promptly then be taken to Kurume University, but due to the advanced stage of decomposition, a definitive cause of death could not be determined. Authorities would eventually find the rationale as to why her body had not been discovered until then. Apparently, the path to those toilets is rather steep, and snakes often come out of the tall grass. The cleaning vehicle was unable to easily get up to that septic tank. Therefore, the students would usually use the other toilets. Because of that, the manhole to the septic tank had not been opened for a very long time, and Tomiko's body was not discovered until very late, which is why she had become skeletonized. So in short order, 2 victims were discovered. Both were females who mysteriously disappeared from their homes in the evening while they were home alone. Neither showed any signs of a struggle and were found to be disposed of at the same relative location using the same method of disposal, and they were from the same district. Unfortunately, it would not take as long for the next victim to vanish. Chizuko Ikagami was a 27-year-old resident of Shiraoshi, whose path became entwined with our enigmatic killer. She worked at a company that made clothing by the name of Rimusu. It would be on Wednesday, October 7th, 1981, when she would go missing after her shift from work at around 5:30 p.m., after which she would go grocery shopping at a supermarket that was nearby her place of employment. She would be seen leaving the supermarket with her groceries in hand by some of the other workers who had left work at around the same time, but unfortunately she would never return home. Sometime later, her husband would contact the Shirohishi police station, who began the initial search of the area. Fearing the worst due to the recently discovered corpses in this relatively calm, small town, authorities would frantically search for the missing 27-year-old. While authorities were not able to find much evidence, one of her co-workers was able to shed light on the series of events that had taken place prior to her disappearance. Apparently, she had been talking pleasantly to a man in his mid-30s. Said man seemed to own a reddish-brown car. Another curious thing that had been discovered was that she had been absent from work for 4 days before her disappearance, and the actions on the 2 days prior to her disappearance have relatively little information available. According to the company, apparently she had been missing those 4 days because she had to care for her mother. Supposedly she had been sick. However, it would appear that this was not true. And while police would believe that this was a viable lead, something terrible would occur. On Wednesday the 21st of October, Chizuko's body would be found in Nakabaru, Miyaki. Based on the state of decomposition, the authorities were able to surmise that she had been dead between 1 to 2 weeks. Her cause of death was quickly determined to be strangulation. It must be noted that she was identified, particularly by the clothing she was wearing, as she had been found wearing her uniform. Authorities would note that an electrical cord had been wrapped around her neck, leaving a drastic amount of bruising. Police, unfortunately, had no viable suspects. The next victim has the least amount of information known about them, to the point that their name has never been directly released to the public, due to being only 11 years old at the time of her death. However, some sources claim her name is Kumi Mishiyama. Our fourth victim lived in Kitashigeyasu, Miyaki District, and she was a student at Kitashigeyasu Elementary School on Wednesday, the 17th of February, 1982. She was reported to go to school as per usual, and around 4:20 p.m. she would leave school with her friend and embark on her walk home. They would part ways rather early into their journey, and sadly this was the last time anyone would see the unfortunate girl alive again. At around 8:40 p.m., the authorities would be contacted due to her having not arrived home. Due to the recent death that had occurred, police were frantically searching to the point that they had even called in the fire department for assistance, and they would go so far as to search throughout the night. Unfortunately, the following day, a grim discovery would be made. At 11 a.m. on the 18th of February, 1982, the young girl's body was found just north of Kitashigeyasu High School. It was noted that she still had her possessions, including her backpack, with her, and even though she had been unclothed from the waist down, her stockings would be found wrapped tightly around her throat. Her body had been found relatively near where Chizuko's own had been found, leading authorities to believe that their cases were linked. However, unlike previously, they had a reliable lead to go on. Apparently, a man in a white car had been seen loitering around the area. Said man was thought to be in his 30s or 40s and described as having a high-bridged nose. Supposedly, he had asked a woman around the QP market if she had needed a ride, but apparently he seemed to be extremely persistent to the point that she had to threaten to call authorities in order to get him to leave. At 2 p.m. that same day, that same car would be found loitering in front of Mitoda Elementary School, just a scant 5 kilometers from the bus stop, where he had previously harassed the woman. The man would then go tell a student, "I will show you pictures of Pink Lady, come this way." Pink Lady was a musical group who was rather famous at the time. He absconded with her and carried her to the woman's restroom. When the girl began to scream, the man would quickly leave her and flee. The man's car would then be later seen at around 3 p.m., this time at Kitashigeyasu. He was seen particularly close to where the girl's body would later be discovered. The man was sighted persistently talking to a pair of junior high school girls, attempting to get them to enter his car. Then at 3:30 p.m., he would be seen approaching a trio of elementary school girls, where he would offer to take them home. The car was last seen at around 4:30 p.m., right around the area where the girl's body would be found, and authorities would state that this would line up more or less to her time of death. From the information gathered, the authorities were able to get a partial license plate. The plate was a Fukuoka plate, and the final 4 digits were 6950. 3 days later, the likeness of the man was officially released on the Saga Shinbun newspaper. Stranger still, a day after the girl's disappearance, one of her friends received a phone call, and a female voice said, "This is Nishiyama." Then the woman on the line promptly proceeded to ask if the girl was there, to which her mother would reply she was already at school, causing the caller to promptly hang up. This was strange because at the time, authorities had not gone public with the case, and this individual at least knew that they could safely pretend to be the missing girl. Also, later still, a postcard with a partial address and the words Kitashigeyasu School Healthcare Center written on it was received. On said postcard was a rather disturbing message. It said, "I intended to abduct and hold the girl for ransom. However, she made a fuss, so I killed her." These two incidents are seen as a potential link to the first victim due to the similarities of a call to the family along with a letter. The fifth incident would occur 5 years later, on Wednesday, July 8th, 1987. The victim in this incident would be Sumiko Fujise, a 48-year-old woman and resident of Takeo. Unfortunately, her husband had been too ill to work, so she worked at a Japanese inn, a rather well-known one, in order to support her family, including her 2 children. Fujise was known to leave her house at 8:30 each and every morning in order to go to work, and was noted to return home anywhere between 7 and 9 p.m. She would also sometimes aid at a snack club for a little extra cash. On Wednesday, the 8th of July, 1987, Sumiko would finish work just after 9 p.m. Rather than returning home, she would wind up inviting one of her co-workers to join her at the snack club. Not to work, mind you, but instead to decompress. They would remain at the club for about an hour, then promptly leave. As they passed the restaurant, she would invite her co-worker to eat, feeling rather peckish. However, her co-worker would unfortunately refuse, stating that she had to leave since any more delays could cause her to miss her train. After this, Sumiko told her co-worker that she would also go home. This would be the last time anyone would see Sumiko alive again. When Fujise had not returned home by midnight, her husband had grown rather worried, leading the family to call Sumiko's co-workers, the restaurant, and Sumiko's older sister. All of them would report that they had not. This led the husband to become even more worried, leading him to walking around searching for her in the area that she had last been known to be. His wife being nowhere to be found led him to contact the authorities. The authorities would quickly proceed to case the area. Unfortunately, there was little information to be found. However, authorities did not believe she had run away. Yet, without a body, they could not ascertain if there had been any foul play. The sixth victim was 50-year-old Kiyomi Nakajima, who was a resident of Shiko, Kitagata. She was known to live with her husband, her daughter, and her second daughter. Her first daughter, however, had moved out after having had a child. Even though she moved out, the eldest daughter worked with her father at a local post office the family ran. All the while, the mother watched over her grandchild. It was noted that despite her being later on in years, Nakajima was a rather active woman. On Wednesday, December 7th, 1988, Kiyomi would leave her home after dinner at around 7:20, intending to go to volleyball practice. Due to being part of the local volleyball team, her destination was the Kitagata Sports Center. Due to an unconnected series of events, her second daughter was home and witnessed the matriarch of the family leave. The daughter noted that her mother had worn an orange sweater, a striped cardigan, and a pair of navy pants. The daughter also noted that her mother was carrying 1,000 yen. The walk should have taken a mere 10 minutes, and normally those 10 minutes would be spent with company, since she would often walk with a friend. However, on this day, said friend was unavailable. Due to the area's rural nature, there were very few people out and about at that time, and part of the pathway to the sports center is a rather thin road that is overgrown with both grass and trees on either side. Nakajima's middle child would return home at around 10:50 p.m., and while not concerned, she found it rather strange that her mother had as of yet not returned home. Initially, she would not raise much of a fuss due to having heard from her mother that the club would be discussing an end-of-year party after practice. Eventually, she would call the sports center and they would reveal that her mother had never actually shown up. When Kiyomi's husband returned home and his daughter had informed him of what had occurred, he immediately left the house in search for his wife, his daughter following shortly thereafter. Unable to find anything, the family would contact the police the following day at 2 a.m. A large police effort would be employed in her search, up to and including police dogs. And one of the police dogs followed the trail for about 5 minutes, then stopped, which pointed to her scent coming to a near end at that area, implying that she may have entered into a vehicle. Police then promptly would go on to interview locals, and according to a witness, they had seen Kiyomi conversing with another woman who was holding a bicycle on the side of the road. The witness was not able to get the best view of the conversation due to being in a car at the time, but she did note that the woman seemed to be in her 30s or 40s. Authorities would go on to attempt to find out who said woman was. Unfortunately, they would be unsuccessful. About a week after the disappearance, the family would receive a strange phone call. The phone call would go as such. Answering the phone, the husband would state, "Hello, this is Nakajima." To which the unknown caller would reply with, "Looks like your wife was found." This caused the husband to reply with, "What?" and the unknown caller would proceed to say, "Nice, right?" leading Mr. Nakajima to state, "Just where on earth was she found?" The unknown caller would proceed to respond by saying, "In Yakigome, right?" After a long pause, the husband would ask, "Who is this speaking?" To which the unknown caller would reply, "A person you know." Over the preceding week, his home and workplace would receive a myriad of calls. However, on the other end, no one made a peep. Now, an important bit of information comes from the use of the word yakigome, due to it not being an official title or name, but rather a way of locals referring to a specific area. The final victim in the Strangler's spree was Tatsuyo Yoshino, a 37-year-old woman who coincidentally worked at the same company in which the third victim worked, Rimusu. At the time of her disappearance, she was living in Kitagata with her family and child. Yoshino would leave work at around 6:55 p.m., then promptly arrived home around 20 minutes later, sat down, ate dinner, then at 7:25 p.m. she would receive a phone call, a rather short phone call which lasted about 20 seconds, to which her only reply was, "Where are you?" and repeated the word "yes" multiple times. While her family did not hear the voice on the other side, they noted that it was almost as if she were taking directions from someone. At around 7:45, rather than getting ready for bed and bathing, Yoshino changed into a different set of clothing. She would dress in a skirt and a white cardigan, applying makeup before grabbing her purse and heading out in her car. As she was leaving, she informed her mother that her friend had gotten a flat and she would be picking her up and dropping her off in Yamaguchi. Her son had stated that he wanted to go along with her, but she promptly refused his request. This would be the last her family would ever see of her. After failing to return home, her family would become rather worried, rightfully so. Then they would proceed to call the authorities. Police would begin to search. Then, on the 27th of January, at around 7:35 p.m., Yoshino's car was located near a bowling alley. This was roughly 3 kilometers away from her home. On the 27th of January, 1989, a 55-year-old woman and her husband would pull over on the side of the road at 5:50 p.m. As the woman started picking flowers and gathering things, she would spot a flower which she believed would make a proper offering at an altar. She saw something white on the ground, some ways away from her. Deciding to investigate, she got relatively close before she found it was a body. What she had found was a body, the body of Tatsuyo Yoshino. This macabre tableau would cause her to quickly make her way back to her husband, and they would promptly contact the authorities. The police would quickly arrive on scene and make a rather dreadful discovery. This macabre tableau was not that of just one body. They had found another body, rather badly decomposed. She was face down, and her lower body was almost gone. This was the body of Nakajima. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. And just 1 meter from this body, they had recovered the skeletonized remains of another body. These were the remains of Sumiko, who had gone missing just shy of 2 years prior. The area was rather morbid. The remains of their clothing and underwear were strewn about, left hanging as if they were trophies. Due to the other 2 bodies showing clear signs of strangulation and the skeletonized remains showing no signs of obvious violence, it was surmised that she too was killed by the same perpetrator, using similar or even the same means. The area where the bodies had been found seemed to have been cut open and also marked with branches, almost as if to point towards where the perpetrator had created an impromptu open-air trophy room. Judging by the state of digested food in her stomach, Yoshino had been slain about an hour after having had her last meal. Further DNA testing discovered someone else's DNA on Yoshino's remains. However, this could not be tested in comparison to those of the other 2 victims due to the advanced state of decay that they had been found in. The DNA found was shown to be of O-type blood. However, the blood was dated to having been on the clothing about a day prior to her disappearance, meaning that this was likely not the perpetrator. Yoshino's dark brown handbag was found off the side of the road 2 kilometers from where the body was found by an elementary school child at around 8 a.m. Unfortunately for the authorities, when searching the bag for any fingerprints or DNA evidence, they would come up short. Strangely, the bag seemed almost spotless. After these bodies had been discovered, the strangler would seemingly vanish, never to be seen from again. While not particularly large, the list of suspects does include some people who are linked to more than one of the victims. An individual strongly believed to be tied to the slaying of Tomiko and Ritsuko was, coincidentally, the boyfriend of Ritsuko's sister, the man who had been referred to as Yu in passing. The very same boyfriend who was rumored to have a relationship not with just the older sister, but with the younger as well. On March 12, 1981, the boyfriend of Ritsuko's sister was arrested for punching a factory worker, and now that he was arrested, a lot more information would come to light. Particularly, he was one of the few people who had been in contact with both the first and second victims. Said boyfriend did not only frequent the cafe where Ritsuko worked, but he also was a rather well-known patron of the bar where Tomiko's mother worked, and he had been known to talk to the child on multiple occasions. Apparently, he had also gone to the local newspapers just after Ritsuko's disappearance and stated, "Don't search for her," then apparently contradicted himself shortly thereafter by asking them to search for her. Supposedly, after Tomiko's disappearance and her mother's change in work venue, Ritsuko's sister's boyfriend would travel all the way to where Tomiko's mother worked in order to be a patron of the bar, which was strange in and of itself due to the rather inconvenient location. And even more suspiciously, he lived right by the school where the bodies were found. Eventually, authorities would find that he had been part of a group who had been known to assault and rob women. This led police to further investigate him, eventually searching his home and finding the same type of stationery used for the original letter that stated, "Your daughter isn't coming back, suffer." Another witness would come forth with information that would lead the police to someone who they deemed as a prime suspect. The witness worked for a fish tackle company, and around 8 p.m. on January 25th, at the same time that witnesses saw Yoshino getting into a white Toyota, this man saw a parked whitish truck in the bowling alley. The truck was found out to be that of Yoshino's significant other, Matsue Teruhiko, and coincidentally, his family home was nearby where the final 3 victims were discovered. He had originally been under scrutiny when Tatsuyo had gone missing. He had even been interrogated for a total of 4 days. Suspiciously enough, right after the final victims' bodies were discovered, he would promptly quit his job and move as far away as he could. While circumstantial at best, this evidence did make him the preferred suspect by the authorities, especially since, when under custody, he would admit to having been the one to throw away Tatsuyo's handbag. Now residing in Fukuoka, he would eventually be arrested that same year in October for drug use. While under interrogation, he had supposedly admitted that he had been the one to slay all 3 women. However, it would not be until 2002 that he would be charged with the murder of these 3 women. And about 3 years after the trial had begun, Matsue was found to be not guilty. This was due to a lack of hard evidence. The judge would also determine that the signed confession given by Matsue years earlier had been a forced confession and was thrown out due to the actions of the officer in charge. The authorities would appeal, but on March 19, 2007, the court would once again find him not guilty. Then, on April 2nd, 2007, the court for the final time would determine that Matsue was not guilty and stated that he was to be released. The prosecution had nothing left, leaving people with a question: if not him, then who? After the police's near obsession with Teruhiko, the public and court would criticize them. After the trial, all the cases would end up hitting the statute of limitations, meaning that the investigation is over. With the information provided, a timeline can be formed to better understand the chain of events involved in this case. Wednesday, August 27, 1975, a 12-year-old girl vanishes while home alone in the evening. Saturday, April 12th, 1980. A 20-year-old woman disappears under similar circumstances. Her body is later found. Her case would be connected to the previous victim due to the relationship of her sibling. Wednesday, October 7th, 1981. A 27-year-old woman was last seen talking to a man in a car. Her body is discovered 2 weeks later, showing signs of strangulation. Wednesday, February 17th, 1982. An 11-year-old girl is strangled to death. Witnesses recall a man in a white car attempting to abduct others on the same day. Wednesday, July 8th, 1987. A 48-year-old woman disappears after receiving a mysterious phone call. Wednesday, January 25th, 1989. A 37-year-old woman goes missing after a night out. January 27th, 1989. The bodies of 3 of the victims are discovered in a forested area. November 1989. A 26-year-old man is arrested and supposedly confessed to the murders of the 3 women. Later, he recants his statements, and the statements were found to be made under duress and thrown out due to police interference. June 2002. The man is charged with the murders of the final 3 victims. The trial begins in October. April 2005. The man is acquitted due to inconclusive evidence and alleged coercion by investigating officers. Following this, a second trial comes forth due to the appeal by authorities. Prosecution introduces mitochondrial DNA evidence, but the man is acquitted once again. The Saga prefectural police would proceed to be reprimanded due to poor investigative practices. While similar, it is strongly believed by many that all the murders being grouped under a singular killer was a mistake by the authorities, and that perhaps there were multiple perpetrators who committed these crimes, and that the investigations were mishandled by grouping them together as a singular killer. However, even after years have gone by, the shadowy presence of the Wednesday Strangler's reign is still a web of unsolved mysteries enveloping the community, leaving behind a trail of victims in its wake, with threads of tenuous connections. Despite this twisted tapestry of disappearances and deaths, the enigma remains an elusive malefactor which remains like a puzzle, whose conclusions authorities reached by conglomerating whatever they could find. Even though the search for answer persists, the statute of limitations leaves us with the chilling knowledge that even if the perpetrator were to admit their crimes, nothing could be done about it. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.